Hello and welcome to the Road Trip Sports Podcast. My name is Harrison Crook and I'm joined today by my co-host Oliver Gilmour. Ollie, how you doing?
I'm good, Harrison. Super excited to get into today's episode. We're travelling 2 hours down the M1 all the way to the beautiful Sydney.
It's nice to be so close this time. Usually our trips so far have been overseas to Miami, to Green Bay. It's nice to be in a city that's nice and close this time, which means a lot of our friends can have much more of an influence on the podcast, can have much more of an interaction with us as they've experienced us just as we have.
Yeah, that's right. We've had some lovely questions this week and some recordings that you'll hear today. And yeah, I'm just super excited to hear everyone's opinion on Sydney and some contribution to the teams that they have.
Yeah, it's been great to see all the interactions on our social media. If you'd like to follow us, we are on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok at Road Trip Sports Pod. We're also on YouTube. We've got a brand new YouTube channel with all of our podcasts and our shorts from our TikTok channel. You can find that searching Road Trip Sports Podcast. Now, with our podcast today, we talk about the sports cities. So this week we're going to talk about Sydney. We're going to talk about all the attractions you can find when you go there to watch sports events. We're going to talk about some of the sports moments from the city, and we're going to discuss our icon of Sydney, and it's a big chat. We've had a lot of people weigh in on that chat. It's going to be interesting to get into, and then we've got a bit of a mailbag at the end, so we're very excited to get into it. Let's get straight in. Ollie, do you want to tell us all about Sydney?
Yeah, just some fast facts for you guys as usual. Sydney is the capital of New South Wales and is the most populated city in Australia. Despite being one of the most expensive cities in the world, it's still in the top 10 most livable cities. Sydney features a number of teams in most notably the A-League, NRL, NBL, Super Netball, Rugby Union and AFL among others. So when we talk about Sydney today, we're going to focus quite a lot on AFL and NRL, and particularly the code war between the two sports. And of course, as Harrison mentioned, we'll touch on our icons. But before we get there, we've got a fun little segment to take us through some of the teams in Sydney. Harrison, did you want to explain that one to our audience?
Yeah, so we're going to do a little bit of team superlatives. So you might have seen in like yearbook quotes, in the yearbooks they have person most likely to do this, person most likely to do that. So we're going to do that with teams. And we've got a few of these quotes that we're going to use teams to describe. So, first of all, Ollie, what is the team most likely to choke in the second half of the season?
I think this one might be pretty obvious to some people, but the Parramatta Eels, they do it every year.
Have a hot start and struggle at the end. Definitely Parramatta Eels is one that comes to mind.
So question for you, who's the team most likely to get blown out in a grand final?
When I think about teams most likely to get blown out in the grand final, there is a certain big sound that comes to my ears. I get reminded of the GWS getting absolutely slaughtered by Richmond in the grand final a couple of years back, and I think that's the most likely to happen again. They are not winning a grand final in the next 10 years. That is my bold prediction.
Your hatred for GWS rings strong, my friend.
It sure does. All right, I've got one for you. Team most likely to fire their coach at the end of the year.
I hate to say it as a West Tigers fan, but I'm going to have to go with Michael Maguire. The Tigers
is for sure Michael Maguire.
They look like they're in a bad way. And he nearly went last year. So
he should have went last year.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's an all right coach, but yeah, Michael Maguire for me.
There just seems to be a culture issue there. And it hasn't been solved by Maguire. It probably won't be solved by the next person. It's a board issue. So yeah, we're going to have to see how we go with that one. You've got the next question?
Yep, next question for you is, which team is most likely to win the flag in 2022?
Cheer, the red and the white. It's the Sydney Swans year. Buddy Franklin's going to kick his 1,000th goal, and we're going to lift the flag in 2022. Mark my words.
Look, I don't agree with you, but I can certainly understand your support for your team. I'm going to have to go with the Penrith Panthers. I think they get it done again this year, back-to-back champions. Yeah, that's my pick.
I think that's a sensible pick, to be honest. As much of a Swans fan as I am, I think Penrith are fairly strong, and I think they'll prove themselves to be one of the tough teams down the stretch in the NRL. All right, my question to you. Team most likely to win the wooden spoon this year?
I think it's got to be the St George Dragons. I think the Tigers are a close second.
Oh, the Tigers are a very close second.
But yeah, I think it's got to be the Dragons for me. Would your vote be the Tigers if you had to vote for another one there?
Oh, if I had to vote for another one, probably the Tigers. Yeah, I just don't. I don't see much strength. I don't see much culture there, stability. I don't think they'll. I don't think they'll do too well this year. I think it'll be another tough year for them. Well, I'll throw it to you for the last question we've got.
Yeah, so I just want to touch on just what you said just there. I think the Bulldogs were a candidate as well, but they've signed Josh Adokar and a number of other players. They've broken the bank this year, so I think that's fine to not include them.
They've signed too many players to be that bad. Like, you need to be really bad to be the wooden spoon. And I just think they've signed too many players to be that bad.
Yep, agree with that. All jokes aside, did you want to take us through some of Sydney's stadiums and what they have on offer for their fans and when visiting Sydney? Sorry.
Yeah, so probably the main stadium for us at least would be the SCG, the Sydney Cricket Ground, and home of the Sydney Swans. And you also see a lot of not a lot, sorry, but a few NRL games being played there from time to time. Very historical games. I seem to recall a Roosters Rabbitohs game being played there a few years back.
Yeah, was that game really wet? And the turf didn't stand up?
It didn't hold up too well. It's more used to the... I mean, even under AFL conditions, it still gets a bit choppy. But the rugby league, the up and back sort of more regimented style of football didn't really help with the turf conditions there. But the Sydney Cricket Ground, I'd say, is the best experience you can get in Sydney for a sports event, yeah.
Yeah, and it's obviously been a notorious cricket ground, as it's known for many, many years now. Home to the Pink Test in Sydney, which is a great event every year. Unfortunately, I missed out on that one this year due to COVID, so I was pretty upset about that. But I'll have to go next year. I think it's one of those things that everyone should embrace. It's for a good cause, and I think that's one of Sydney's big events every year in the start of January.
Yeah, definitely. So they've got the cricket there, they've got a little bit of the rugby league, but the main attraction there has got to be the AFL. I love watching Swans games at the SCG. Used to work for the AFL, and I'd work with the halftime Oz kickers, which was one of my favourite parts about AFL. So for those people who don't know, what they do is they bring a bunch of little kids who play the sport, who nice young ones, take them out into the field and let them play little games at halftime on the field of the SCG. So in my role with the AFL, we'd help get them onto the field and make sure they don't get lost in the underground tunnels of the SCG. So it's a really cool experience, and it's a great place to watch a game of footy. Yeah,
I've always enjoyed going to the SCG, even as I suppose I was a little bit of a Swans fan as a young kid.
Did you ever play the halftime Oz kick?
I did. I think I was a bit older though. I think I wasn't Oz kick. It might have been like under 10s or something like that.
I remember playing. I've got a funny story. My dad's gonna love that I'm telling this one. So I was super young. I would have been about probably like 5 or 6 playing the halftime Oz kick.
Gotcha.
And I wasn't the most footy focused player at that age. I was very much away with the birds, excited to be on the big stage with all the crowd around me. So I decided to have a bit of a crawl. And do you know those like triangle advertisements that they bring out, like the triangle sort of TP sort of looking advertising boards they bring out?
Yep. You went underneath.
I went through it. I climbed through it, and when I popped myself out, I popped myself into an under-12s game. And I got absolutely slaughtered. These guys were bumping, knocking me over like crazy. So my little brain decided, I don't like this very much. I decided to crawl back through and found my game again.
You wouldn't read about it, mate. That's interesting.
Apparently Dad said that all the excitement was all on the big screen as well. Apparently I got on the big screen for being the crazy kid that crawled through into an under-12s game. So
if only there was YouTube back then, mate, you'd probably be on everything.
I know. I'm very grateful that there isn't. So there's lots of other stadiums around Sydney. There's lots of ways to experience sport. One of the biggest ones that was recently torn down and has been rebuilt. It's set to be finished in August this year. The Sydney Football Stadium.
Yeah, that one's pretty close to the SCG. I'd say they're nearly next door, just about touching each other. In between the two stadiums, you've sort of got some of the Swans facilities, the Roosters facilities, and the Waratahs facilities, who I believe play at Sydney Football Stadium.
Sure.
I can't quite recall if I've been to a game there before. Maybe I have when I was a little bit younger, probably an NRL game, but
I recall. I think it was a Tigers Eels game I went to when I was a member of the Tigers. But my biggest memory, actually, and this is a shout out to Taylor Swift. My first Taylor Swift concert was actually at the Sydney Football Stadium.
And moving on,
to give you an idea about how close the SCG and the football stadium actually are, I got the VIP special package. I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, and the VIP pre-show party was in the SCG.
Okay.
So it was in the SCG member area in the corporate function boxes there.
Yep.
And then we basically just walked over and went straight into the concert. So it's that close where you can actually hold events in one and then move over to the other. So that gives you an idea about how close and connected those two are. And it's going to be great when it's back up and running in August, having those two big venues there.
Yeah. So another stadium that's noteworthy that we actually talked about last week, being pretty similar to the Hard Rock Stadium, is Bankwest Stadium, which opened in 2019. It's home to a lot of the Western Sydney football teams. Do the Wanderers play there? I think the Wanderers play there as well.
I believe they do.
Yeah. So plenty of events there. That's a really cool stadium. I haven't checked that one out yet. I'd be pretty keen to go and watch a game there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny when we talk about the Sydney stadiums. It's not as much about if we get a chance to go over the States, it's like, hey, do you want to go to a game like in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's good. It's good, and it's probably good as well for you listeners who actually understand what we're talking about and can sort of relate to some of the things we're saying, compared to the last couple of weeks if you haven't been to those cities. Another prominent stadium is Stadium Australia, or ANZ Stadium, and the surrounding Olympic Park complex there. GWS play out that way. There's lots of events held there and lots of concerts as well as at the Kudos Bank Arena. Awesome setup
It's
that they
fantastic.
made. Yeah, they made that one for the 2000 Olympics.
Yeah, and what a big event it was. And we might get into the 2000 Olympics now. So the 2000 Olympics, it was the second time the Summer Olympics were held in Australia. And what an exciting time it was for Australians. I know we were both very young, but even today, the effects are still being felt from it. The excitement's still being felt from it. You see things about Sydney 2000 all around. And for us being only so young, it still holds a big impact for us. Yeah,
well, I think when they built it, I mean, for every Olympics, they don't make a lot of money. In contrary, they actually lose a lot of money. But I still think it was a good decision. Whenever you can get an Olympics, that's super exciting. We're getting the Olympics in Brisbane. Is that 2032?
I think 32, yeah.
Yeah, which will be super exciting as well. And I'm sure we'll have to go up to Brisbane and watch that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been great for Sydney having all of those amenities that have come from hosting a Olympics here, and I'm sure it's going to be great for Brisbane as well. But let's get into the Olympics in Sydney. So Australia was 4th in the medal count, which is quite successful for Australia. You always seem to find the host country being a bit more successful when they are on their home turf. Some of the memorable moments were Kathy Freeman capturing the 400-metre gold, which is one of the ones that still gets played. Every sports package before a sports event, whenever it's on in Australia, always shows that one, I feel.
Amazing.
Michael Phelps had his Olympic debut at the 2000 Olympics. We had Eric the Eel. Did you want to talk about Eric the Eel at all?
I don't know if I want to talk about it in depth, but wasn't that just a funny moment? This guy that's barely swum before, jumping in the water. Everyone else false starts in the qualifying, so he has to swim the race by himself. And it didn't look great, but looking back at it now, I think everyone can laugh at it.
Yeah, for sure. And the last one, we had the Dunk de la Mort, or the Dunk of Death. Vince Carter jumping over the top of a French national team player. Do you want to talk to that one a little bit?
Yeah, that one is pretty memorable. I feel like if it happened in an NBA game, it would be the greatest dunk of all time. So Vince Carter gets the ball. He literally jumps over top of a 7-foot French national player and slams the ball down. So go and check that one out. I'm not too sure whether we'll have moments from the Olympics posted on our socials this week. That could be something that we do if you would like us to post that. But yeah, certainly some great moments there.
For sure. Well, it seems like a perfect time for us to get into our Icon of Sydney debate. Now, there has been so many icons of Sydney. There have been so many fantastic sports people to both come from and perform in Sydney. So we've got a bit of a list of people who we'd just like to give a bit of a shout out to. We're not going to go fully in depth on all these people, just a little bit of a shout out, say, hey, recognising that these people have been important to the sports landscape. Ollie, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, so just a couple for me. Paddy Cummings, the Australian Test cricket captain. He's a fantastic young player and bowler. Another one here is Alexander Volkanovski, who is the current UFC featherweight champion, and he is born and bred in Illawarra. Loves Sydney, loves Illawarra. I see him at a fair few Illawarra Hawks games, actually.
Yeah, right.
Another one for me is Dally Messenger, also renowned for his Dally M medal. And then another one for me is Ian Thorpe, who had 48 swimming medals whilst competing for Australia. And I'd say he was probably arguably one of Australia's best swimmers of all time.
Yeah, for sure. A few I had that I wanted to mention were Leighton Beachley, 7-time world surfing champion, absolute legend of the sport. You got Michael O'Loughlin. He was actually one of my favourite players growing up. I love watching Michael O'Loughlin play, and if I saw a bit more of Michael O'Loughlin's prime, like we have with some of the other players that we've got coming up, I think he definitely would have been in there for in contention for our icon. Definitely love the moment when he approached the West Coast fans and gave them a bit. That's one of the runs I remember watching live. We've also got Steve Smith, ex-Australian cricket team captain, fantastic cricketer. Unfortunately, had the marring of his captaincy with the sandpaper issue and the ball tampering issue, but still a fantastic cricketer for Australia. And I've got Dawn Fraser as well, swimming champion, fantastic legend of the sport.
Yeah, one I will mention as well, who I think's probably an up-and-comer, and we might see him win a few world championships, is Tim Zhu. So he's Australia's boxing icon, and he's defeated Jeff Horn recently, and is a pretty experienced fighter for such a young age. Son of Costa Zhu. He's an icon to look out for, and maybe one day he'll represent Sydney on the world stage.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely one to look out for. But that brings us to our finalists. We've got 2 finalists today that we're going to sort of debate and have a chat about. Our 2 finalists are both Sydney Swans legends. Would you call them legends?
I'd call them legends, yeah.
We've got the great Adam Goodes and the absolutely stunning Lance Buddy Franklin. Ollie, do you want to take us through Buddy Franklin to start?
Yeah, so Buddy Franklin began his career with Hawthorn and came to the Swans in 2014, which was a pretty big move at the time.
It was a big money deal, yeah.
Yeah, how did you feel about that move at the time? Do you remember?
Excited, obviously excited. I mean, it's such a fantastic player. There was the wonder with the length of the contract. It was a big discussion of, is he going to be able to play? He's already played for so long. Is he going to be able to survive out the length of the contract?
Yeah, I think they also had some issues with Kurt Tippett's contract around that time as well. He was causing some issues as he was always injured. So I think they feared a little bit of a Kurt Tippett situation, but yeah, no, that hasn't happened. Buddy's played 136 games for the club, and his stats at the Swans, he's had many stats at Hawthorn as well, but we'll specifically get into his stats at the Swans as we're talking about Sydney today. So he was a four-time All-Australian, a 2-time Coleman medalist, a 6-time Swans leading goal kicker, and a 3-time Brett Kirk medal winner, which is contested between the best on ground for the GWS Giants versus Sydney Swans game that's held twice a year now. They give out the medal both times?
They give out the medal both times, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, Buddy Franklin is a fantastic player. He's been able to have an impact on AFL in New South Wales as a whole. He's such a polarising character, being such a big guy, kicking goals, and even his goal kicking routine is just it's unconventional, but everyone loves
Definitely.
it. Swing around on the corner, kick goals, and just take it from there, buddy. It's all on you.
For sure. He's definitely one of the more exciting players to watch. I know in my time working for the AFL, every single person asked about Buddy all the time. That was all the questions for all the kids that asked whenever there was a Swans visit. They were always asking, is Buddy coming? Whenever I'd work at an Auskick camp, they'd always, can you teach me to kick like Buddy Franklin? He's just that icon in the kids' eyes that they look to him as the big deal, like this big superstar. The likes of which we don't see as often in the AFL. It's more of an American ideal of the iconic superstar single player carrying the team sort of thing.
Yeah.
Something we don't see as much in the AFL.
I think the fact that Buddy Franklin's so iconic is when they post a news story of him taking out his bins. Did you see that?
No. What happened?
I'll have to show you after the pod, but literally the Daily
Taking out
Mail,
his
I think it was the
bins.
Daily Mail, has
The
posted a
Daily Mail will
photo.
post anything.
Have posted a photo of Buddy Franklin taking out his bins, and I think they've literally captioned it, Buddy Franklin takes out his bins. Pretty much end of story. Anyway, give it a
He's just
read
like
after
us. He's just like us.
Yeah.
He's one of the people.
That's it. So I think one of the issues with Buddy as a Sydney Swans player and contributing to his icon status is the fact that he hasn't won in Sydney.
He hasn't won a flag in Sydney, and he hasn't had his whole career in Sydney. He built up that legend status before coming to Sydney. He was already that icon before he came to Sydney. And the discussion is he an icon of Sydney or is he an icon of the AFL?
Yeah, I think that's the issue. He's an icon of both, and he is such an iconic AFL player. I'd say he's going to be in the argument for one of the greatest Indigenous AFL players of all time. One of the greatest forwards of all time. And a bit different these days, look, because Buddy, 4 or 5 guys on him, sitting guys back in the hole, a lot more zone defense. Back in the day, you'd see Tony Lockett, who was a Swans hero, and actually probably that's his mention. We'll give him his mention now because he probably should have been a finalist as well. But he had a lot of one-on-one matchups, and you see Buddy today. He's just trying to do everything with 3 guys around him, Phil Davis hanging off him, and 10 others. So
yeah, incredible talent. Well, let's get into our other nominee now. Our other nominee is the incredible Adam Goodes. Now, Adam Goodes played 372 games for the Swans and kicked 464 goals. He's a 2-time Brownlow medalist. He's also won 2 AFL premierships. Do you want to talk about his AFL premierships?
Yeah, so he won premierships in 2005 and 2012. The 2005 game was against West Coast, the first of 2. They took that one out in a very, very close contest. The most memorable moment of that finals for me was definitely the Leo Barry mark. But
Leo Barry, you star.
Yeah, Goodsy was unreal. In 2012, I think that's a big Goods moment as well. He kicked the goal to sort of go ahead, to put the Swans ahead.
That was huge. I remember in our prep for a podcast this week, we were sending that clip back and forth. The absolute champion that he is. In the clutch moments, he always made a big deal and always got them in that spot to win it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he also did it on one leg as well. He got injured. Can't quite remember what quarter it was, but yeah, he was on one leg and he was just a superstar.
It didn't matter that day. He was coming home with a flag that day.
It didn't matter.
So he's also a 3-time Bob Skilton medalist in 03 and 06, which were his 2 Brownlow medalist years as well. And he also won the Bob Skilton medal in 2011. He was a 4-time All-Australian in 03, 06, 09 and 2011. He was a 3-time Sydney leading goal kicker in 2009 all the way to 2011. He had 3 years straight being the leading goal kicker for the Swans. He was the rising star in 99. He's also in the Indigenous team of the century, which is a huge accomplishment. We've had such incredible Indigenous players throughout the sport. So what an incredible accomplishment for Adam Goodes to be included in that team.
Yeah, and we also have to mention that he was Australian of the Year in 2014 for his off-field activism. He was just a great role model for a lot of kids, and
great ambassador for the game.
Yeah, great ambassador
for the Indigenous community. Yeah.
Great ambassador for the game as well.
Now it's hard to talk about Adam Goodes without talking about his the unfortunate way he was forced to exit the AFL. Did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Look, I don't want to touch on it too much just because it's a little bit sour, but I think we'd love to see him in the AFL Hall of Fame one day, if and when he chooses to accept that nomination. But yeah, Goodsy's been an absolute stalwart of the club, playing those 372 games, and I think he probably nearly could have got to that 400 if he continued to play, which
sure.
I think he probably intended to, but unforeseen circumstances. I did really appreciate how a lot of the other Indigenous players that the Swans got around him at that time, Lewis Jetta,
for sure,
all that sort of stuff. So Goodsy, absolute icon for me, even as a non-Swans fan, and as Swans as a secondary team growing up, being so close to Newcastle. Goodsy had a big impact on me as a young player. He would also attend a lot of youth events, and he's just a great ambassador for the game.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, now's the time in the podcast we're actually going to have a bit of fan interaction. So we've had a few of our friends and a few fans of the podcast have sent in their thoughts, weighing in on the Goodes versus Franklin debate, weighing in on who they think is the icon of Sydney. So we're going to hand it over to our fans now to give their thoughts on the debate.
There's no questioning that Buddy's an incredible talent and a once-in-a-generation player, one of the most exciting players you'll ever watch. And, he's done a lot for the Swans, 6-time leading goal kicker, 2-time Common medalist, and just clutched up in so many games for the Swans. It's just so exciting to watch. And
I think everyone knows who Buddy is in Sydney, AFL supporter or not.
Buddy is the most iconic footballer of the last 20 years, no doubt. Just his bravado and his aura on the field. He's an entertainer. He's got all the showmanship, probably the most entertaining footballer we've ever seen. And he's a guy that brings people through the gate.
When you think of Buddy Franklin, though, despite his impact on the field for the club, I think he's done a lot more in a media sense in terms of putting the spotlight on the Sydney Swans and bringing new fans to the club. Whereas Adam Goodes had, from a player perspective, they were different types of players, but Goodsy had Brownlow medals, 2 premierships at the club, one being when he was captain, 3 best and fairest medals at the club, and he was one club player for 15 years.
I guess you have to look at Goodsy, though, and he had such a long career with the Swans, and won 2 Brownlow medals, 2 premierships, and kicked the winning goal in that 2012 grand final, and he played half that game on one leg. I really do think Goodsy should be considered the most iconic Sydney player.
If you're looking at just the Swans' point of view, you would have to think Goodsy, and obviously his work in the Indigenous community off the field was pretty elite too.
And I think the other thing that gets him over the line is when you think of Buddy, most neutral fans will probably see Buddy as a Hawthorn player more than a Swans player. However, when you see Adam Goodes, you can only imagine him in the red and white. So I think he just gets the nod as a Sydney icon.
Thanks so much to the fans that submitted there. It was great to hear some different perspectives and different sort of lived experiences about how they interacted with these iconic figures.
Yeah, it's really good to hear another opinion as well, and even just a little bit of someone else speaking besides our voices for a little bit. But yeah, thanks boys for sending those in. It's much appreciated, and a lot of you being Swans fans, you're able to provide a pretty close and personal opinion for us. Harrison, do you think we should get into the winner and their moments?
I definitely think we should. So we had a poll that went up on our Instagram. If you'd like to interact with these polls, they're on Instagram at roadtripsportspod. The poll results, it was a very close decision actually, only a couple of votes in it. It was 57% for Adam Goods. It was 29% for Lance Franklin and 14% for other. So it was a very close result. And our pick for the winner lines up evenly with that poll result. Our pick for the winner for the icon of Sydney is Adam Goods.
Adam Goods. Yeah, I don't think we could have went wrong either way. I think it was one of those ones.
I think the biggest thing it came down to was sort of like our chat that Lance Franklin is the icon of the AFL, and because he didn't spend his whole career in Sydney like Adam Goods did, he is so Sydney. It's like sort of Joe from Newcastle talked about right at the end, where you think of Adam Goods, you can't help but think of the red and white. He's so attached to Sydney and the Sydney Swans brand, it's hard to separate the two, and that's why we ended up going with Goods as our icon of Sydney for this week. But let's get into the top 5 most iconic Adam Goods moments. If you'd like to watch these moments play out, you can see our TikTok and all the rest of our socials at Road Trip Sports Pod. TikTok wizard himself, Oliver Gilmour, has been up to his old tricks, creating a great video. So would you like to take us through the number 5 Adam Goods moment?
Yeah, so the number 5 most iconic Adam Goods moment is his selection in the Indigenous Team of the Century. Now, this one ties in a lot of his other moments that he had as an Indigenous role model and activist. And when I think, to tie this in, when I think of the most Indigenous Adam Goods moment was when he did that war cry dance against Carlton in Indigenous round. I was actually at that game, and that bunch of Carlton fans that he was doing it to, I was amongst those guys. So, that's a super exciting moment and just a great accomplishment for him there. Did you want to take us through number 4?
Yeah, number 4. It was when he won his first Brownlow medal in 2003. It was actually a 3-way tie for the Brownlow medal, but it's still a fantastic accomplishment for Goods. He had a fantastic year that year and was definitely one of the standout players in the competition.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so the number 3 moment, Ollie.
Yeah, so the top 3, the third best and most iconic Adam Goods moment is him and the Swans winning the 2005 AFL Grand Final.
What a big deal. That was huge. As a Swans fan, 72-year drought was broken that day, and obviously we haven't lived through those 72 years, but just seeing the elation, seeing my dad, my mum, seeing everyone on the same side. I know in Newcastle it's very Swan-centric here, so seeing everyone barrack hard for just the one result and the Swans getting up was absolutely fantastic. What a moment, and Goods played a very incredible part in that too. He was very great on the day. Yeah,
unfortunate not to win the Norm Smith medal. That one actually went to Chris Judd, one of my guys.
I think he was up for a good chance at the Norm Smith if they didn't give it to Judd.
Yeah, even quick mention to Ryan O'Keefe. He had a fantastic game as well during that final.
I mean, you could almost give the Norm Smith to Leo Barry for one mark alone. It was the mark that ended the drought. It was Leo Barry, you star. Let's go to number 2 now. Number 2 was winning the 2006 Brownlow medal to follow up a fantastic premiership winning season. He followed that up with a great Brownlow medal, and this was the first and only time he won it just by himself. So it was his medal alone. What a performance it was!
Yeah, another great season, and a great accomplishment for Goods there.
And the number 1 moment, the most iconic Adam Goods moment, was
winning that 2012 AFL Grand Final. Absolute huge moment. Close game against Hawthorn again. It seems like the Swans just love close grand finals. Except for that,
when they're losing.
Yeah. But yeah, Goods was absolutely huge in that game, playing on that one leg, as we mentioned earlier, and kicking that goal to put Sydney in front with 6 minutes to go. Setting up that huge goal by Nick Malcheski. Snap over the shoulder. Probably one of the best grand final goals I've ever seen.
Yeah, and Goods was one of the older statesmen at that point in his career. So him leading the troops, being that veteran presence around all the other Swans and lifting them in close to the end of his career there, being able to lift them to that flag was quite an incredible moment for Goods.
Yeah, absolutely huge. And I think all of those top 5 moments and all those Goods moments, we could have talked about a fair few others, but that just gives you a bit of an insight into his accomplishments and his time at Sydney.
For sure. Well, that finishes up our icon debate. We're going to move into the mailbag now. We've got 2 great questions that we're going to discuss now. So the first one, Joe from Newcastle has asked, who's winning the Code War? So quick background of, if you're wondering, what Code War? So we're talking about AFL versus NRL. For the longest time, basically, as soon as the Sydney Swans were moved into Sydney, there's been that discussion of what's the strongest sport in New South Wales? Can anyone top the NRL? I mean, NRL's got so many clubs in New South Wales. Can anyone top it? And we've seen the scales start to shift lately. What's your opinion on the Code War?
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky one. And as Joe mentioned to me when he asked the question, he sort of mentioned that Sydney's called a rugby league heartland, and yet he sort of felt that AFL trumped them in viewership and membership numbers.
Well, they do. The numbers are there.
Yeah, that's it. I suppose to be devil's advocate there are more teams in the NRL across Sydney. I think there's 9 to be exact. But
more teams means more teams, spread. Where 2 AFL teams, there's really a lot of people are so embedded in the Swans. It's one, like I rag on GWS as one of my favourite pastimes, but in all honesty, they are still a recent club. They are still a new club, and they're still finding their membership footing. Only now would I say that they're, in the past sort of 5 years, have they been sort of seen on the same level as the rest of the AFL clubs. So having only 2 clubs to really be able to support in Sydney definitely would have an impact on those membership numbers.
Yeah, I think whilst that's a difficult hypothetical question, and you could sort of lean either way with many different arguments, I think, in my opinion, it's safe to say that in Sydney, the Swans are the top team, the most supported, most viewed.
Definitely.
Whether that's because they're one of 2 teams there, which I think has some contribution towards it.
I think the Swans are the favourite of the AFL teams in Melbourne. And it's sort of a similar thing to AFL versus NRL in general, the Swans versus Giants. It's an established brand being in the city for so long, and an up-and-comer travelling to the city, and the scales are starting to balance out over time, where at first it was so Swans dominant, it was so NRL dominant. Now, in both cases, I'd say the scales are starting to balance themselves out, where you're finding a lot more AFL fans around. I know we're in Newcastle, not Sydney, but I remember growing up, I'd always used to cop some flack for playing AFL, for being an AFL fan. It's doesn't have that much of a stigma anymore.
No, it doesn't. I hear plenty of kids, as youth participation levels increase in Newcastle and in Sydney for that matter, I think the stigma of the sort of I don't feel like AFL cops it as much.
Yeah, AFL was always seen, at least in my experiences, everyone was like, oh, it's so soft. It's not as tough as rugby league. But I think it's almost hurt rugby league in terms of youth retention, where being seen as the softer sport is more likely to get parents invested in that sport, get their kids into it, because they see it as a less dangerous sport for their kids, which is why more people are playing AFL, more people are coming through the ranks, and that's why the scales are starting to even themselves out there. Yeah,
as you mentioned, there's that concussion risk. I suppose there's a concussion risk for any sport, but especially that heavy contact with NRL.
I mean, as well, kids are naturally drawn to, or at least boys I know, are naturally drawn to the tackle sports, a lot of the boys I know. And if you're going to play a tackle sport, parents want their kids playing the safest tackle sport that they can to sort of appease both sides.
That's right.
And I think AFL is that alternative, and that's why they're seeing such growth. It's also a big fact that AFL have paid a lot more attention to the long-term goals, to investing in the future, where rugby league know that they've got the advantage in New South Wales, and I feel like they aren't out promoting as much, where AFL knows they've got the ground to make up, and that's where a lot of the focus has been, is on the youth, is on making sure the next generation are AFL fans.
Yeah, that's it. And we were able to put up a quick little poll. So, of course, check out our polls every week. But this one, did you want to tell us the results as to who was winning the Code War?
Very interesting result I found, because I would have guessed that the result was going to go the other way. Just asking the question, thinking about it in my head. So the result was 88% to AFL and only 12% to NRL. So AFL is deemed by our fans, at least, as winning the Code War. I know a lot of our fans and a lot of our friends are AFL players and AFL fans, so that might have tipped the scales just a little bit on that poll. But it is interesting to note the perception of AFL is definitely changing in New South Wales and in Queensland as well. In the traditional rugby league heartlands, it seems like AFL is starting to prevail.
Yeah, that's right. Did you want to take us through the next question?
Yeah, so we had a question from Bailey from Newcastle. What are the Swans missing, or what do they need to change to be a genuine contender in the upcoming season? Ollie, what do you think?
I think the Swans are on a massive rise, as much as I sort of hate to say it.
Come on, you love the Swans. You were a Swans Academy kid when you were younger, hey?
I was. Yeah, but to answer your question, Creamy, basically, I think the Swans, they're missing another tall piece. I think they could use, if they could clone Rampy, I think they'd be sweet. We saw what happened with Melbourne once they acquired. They had Jake Lever, and they were just missing out on Stephen May to sort of get him over the line. So I think certainly another key defender. They've got to replace Jordan Dawson this year. My boy Macca, I hope he slips into his role. But a lot of young kids coming through. They only just re-signed Errol Goulden the other day.
Great re-signing too. He was a young one that provided such a spark last year.
Yeah, for sure. And you've got Braden Campbell, Logan McDonald. They really had a good draft last year, and usually you don't see that much of an impact straight away. But we certainly saw it last year with the Swans making the 8 and just losing to GWS.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing for the Swans as well has been injuries. Past few years, injuries have sort of plagued the team, where they're waiting on Buddy to get healthy, waiting on other key pieces to be healthy in the team, where it's going to be a big deal as well this season with the COVID. Where we're at now, where it's starting to let it ride, has been the sentiment. We're not going to get into politics, but being more prevalent in the community and being more at risk of catching COVID will definitely have an impact on teams as we get along. You've seen in other sports around the world, particularly in the soccer. I've seen a lot of, in the Bundesliga, in the Premier League, they've had a lot of issues with players being on the sidelines due to COVID. And having to call up, you've seen reserves, you've seen under-18s players being called up to the main squad. So that's something that might be happening in the AFL. So if the Swans can stay healthy or healthier than most, I think that's what they're looking at for the 2022 season. They need to be healthy. They need to be keeping themselves on the pitch.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, that depth is a really big issue. And teams with depth this year are going to go really, really well.
Definitely.
The Swans with a lot of young blokes. A big favourite of mine's Will Gould, who is the Swans backman. I hope he gets a game this year. But yeah, they've got plenty of depth. And look, if you're a Swans fan, I'd be pretty excited. So tying in our next question, Josie from Newcastle has asked, and I'm glad I'm asking...
I've just seen this question. That's fantastic.
I'm glad I'm asking Harrison this question, and he's not asking me. But Josie has asked, why do GWS suck in netball and AFL?
All right, let me give you plenty of reasons. Honestly, I just think it's because they've got the younger brother syndrome. They think they're there, but they think they're trying to rival the Swans. I can't speak as much to netball, but in AFL, they're trying to rival the Swans. They think of themselves as at that level, but they just don't have that culture yet. And I know they've beaten us in all the finals lately, and I know they've had their successes, but I think they need to shake that younger brother syndrome and actually do something in September.
Yeah, whilst I don't agree they suck, but if I had to be critical, like Harrison mentioned, I think it's a little bit of a culture thing. You've seen guys leave the club like Adam Treloar, Dylan Shield, the list goes on and on and on, of guys who what could have been, particularly Jack Steele breaking out last year. But yeah, I really think that it's going to be an interesting season for GWS. I think they'll probably knock off the Swans again. But
you jerk.
But yeah, I think thanks for your question, Josie. Interesting one.
Honestly, if the Swans get 2 wins all season and they're both against GWS, I'm a happy Swans fan.
It seems like me against the Bears, mate. Yeah.
Definitely me against the Jets as well. I think we've got those teams where we're like, oh, I just want to beat you. I want to beat you so bad. But yeah, I think that's a great note to end on. That's it for our podcast today. Thank you so much for tuning in once again to the Road Trip Sports Podcast. We're going to be back next week with an area that we've both been to and we've both seen sports in for the first time, an American city that we've both been to and seen sports in. Do you want to reveal what city we're going to next?
Yeah, another city very close to my heart, the beautiful San Francisco, home to the Golden State Warriors amongst a lot of other teams, being one of my favourite basketball teams. I'm sure we'll get into that as well.
Definitely. And on your recent trip, you also went to a couple of Warriors games, so it's going to be definitely some recent chats. You went to the new stadium too, didn't you?
I did. I'd previously travelled to Oracle, which I'll get into on the next episode. But yeah, attended the Chase Centre, which was a really good experience, and I'm excited to get chatting about that one next week.
Well, it's going to be very exciting. So make sure you keep up with us on all of our socials for all the polls coming out. We're going to have polls. We're going to have some fan questions. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any experiences that you've had in San Francisco or any other cities around the world that you'd love to talk about, if you've got a great sports story, we would love to hear it. So make sure you get in contact with us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Road Trip Sports Pod. We've got our YouTube page, Road Trip Sports Podcast is what you need to search. If you've got any inquiries at all or anything you'd like to share with us, the best place to email us is a roadtripsportspodcast@gmail.com. So if you've got any of those stories that you'd like to share, whether written or whether you'd like to record yourself in a voice recording, we would love to hear from you. This is a fan-driven podcast, and we'd love to get all of your experiences, not just our own, on this podcast. So it's been great to talk about Sydney today. It's been great to have all the fan interactions today, and we hope we can see you next week for our chat about San Francisco. But that's all from me. I've been Harrison Crook. This has been Oliver Gilmour. Thank you so much for listening.
See ya.